Welcome back to another tutorial, and in this tutorial I'll be taking you through the structure of a Laravel application. So remember, in the other previous tutorial we saw how we are able to create our first Laravel application. Now in this tutorial I'll be explaining more of the structure of that Laravel application. And now, since in our last tutorial we created this Apex demo as our first Laravel application, I'll first open it a bit, and I can explain things from here, or I can simply open our VS Code, which is our coding environment, so that I can be explaining this stuff from the other side. So what I'm going to do, simply just come up here and write in CMD. So just type in CMD so that you can access this dark terminal. Then write in code, then space dot, so that you're able now to open the entire folder or the entire project inside your coding environment. So as you can see, my VS Code is simply loading so that we are able to open our Laravel application inside the coding environment, like where we shall be writing our code from. So as you can all see, for those who have done already HTML, CSS, you have used this before. But my task right now is to explain the structure of a Laravel application by looking at a real-world project, for example, this one that we created. So you can just close all this and then you only remain with this. So I'll simply now first explain what each and every file and folder means. For example, now we have folders and then we have files. So I'll begin either from bottom going up, or I can begin from up going down. But I'll first explain these files as you're seeing them. Then later I'll go on to explain each folder and what it does for our application. And I urge you that the moment you create a Laravel application, please do not delete anything. Until maybe you're told to do so, do not delete anything, because each file you're seeing here, each page you're seeing here, each folder you're seeing here has got a role as you're running your first Laravel application. So I'll first of all explain. I'm not going to explain all the files in their order. I'll just explain key files and what they are used for. So I'm going to explain key files and what they are used for. So to begin with, I'll first explain this file called the artisan. And if you have already watched one of my video where I've explained some of the key features of Laravel application, it has got something to do with the artisan. Now, artisan, it's command line tool that we are going to use as we are interacting with our application. For example, when we shall be running our Laravel application, we run it in a terminal, and as you're running it, you simply call your artisan and then you tell it to do whatever you want it to do. For example, there is a command line which says php artisan run serve, rather php artisan serve. Now php artisan serve is a command line tool that helps us to run our Laravel application, but for us to be able to do that, we need this file called the artisan. So that's why you're seeing this artisan file being displayed here. Now the other file that you need is this file called that .env file. Now there is a file called that .env where we declare all the environment variables of our application. Now in this, what do we mean? Now if you're coming from the HTML, rather the PHP background, you realize that for you to be able to interact with your database, you have been always creating a file called the connect.php, where you declare variables like the localhost, the server name, the username, the password, and the DB name. Now with Laravel, for you to be able to connect with your database, you simply need this on line 23. You simply need the DB connection, which is MySQL. In case maybe you're going to use a MySQL database, you leave everything as it is. What you can maybe change is the database name. So you ensure that the same database name that you're passing here is the same database name that you created, in your maybe phpMyAdmin. I won't go there. I'll explain that in the next episode. For now, just take that with Laravel, we declare all the connection to our database in the .env file. And it does not only do that, it has other roles. For example, we have the session drivers. Of course, right now they're a little bit not so familiar to you, we can just take it that there are other connection variables, like maybe the email, like those mailers and any other. So for whatever maybe integration in the future, for those who would love to do that, maybe you have external database, you have external services that you're going to interact, that are going to interact with your application, we declare all their variables from this file called the .m file. So this .m file is so important, and its copy is this .m.example. Why? Now, as the moment you develop your application, if maybe you remember, we always push our application to the server. That's the GitHub. So this .m file does not go along with our application, so it always remains on our local machine. So the copy of it is the .m.example, which goes to the server. So next time, maybe if I'm cloning it back to my machine and I want to run it, I can simply just use this variable to create my .m. So I think for now we can just take one thing, that the .m file is used to declare all the environment variables of our Laravel application. Now, after finishing these two, so we have just explained the .env and then the artisan file. Now from here, now the rest of these files we can first leave them for now. I'll simply now go to the files and I explain each file one by one. So I'll begin with a folder, rather these are folders. I'll begin with a folder called what? Resources. Now when you talk about a folder, it means that inside it there are other files and folders that we might find there. For example, if I happen to open this folder called resources, inside the resources there are other subfolders like the CSS, the JS, and the views. So I'll simply open the views, and when I open the views, you can see that we have already a pre-developed file called the welcome.bread.php. If you remember some of the features we have explained about Laravel, we have said that Laravel, it has what we call the bread template engine. Now this is what they were referring to, the bread. So in Laravel, as we are creating files, we create them with the .bread extension. What do we mean? Now the views in an application of Laravel, just treat them as the front end, as the UI, like the user interface, what the user interacts with, like the HTML and the CSS. So the HTML of our application is what we create inside the bread.php file. So whatever name we can give, for example, this is just welcome, but we can create others like maybe the home.bread.php, we can create the contact.bread.php. All those ones should reside in the folder called the views. And where do we find this folder? It is inside the resources. You open the views, then that's where you create all those files. So if I happen to open this file, as you can all see, at least I think you're familiar with this. These are some of the HTML. Of course, there are some advanced things, but at least you know you're familiar with HTML and the CSS, and there are some bootstrap, as you can see. Though Laravel uses more of now Tailwind CSS, which I'll explain in the nearby tutorials that I'll be creating for you people. Now, these are the files. And so meaning moving forward, the moment you want to create any page that you want the user to see in the front end, those pages should be created inside the views, the views folder, and then that file should always have its name. Let's say it is contact.bread.php. So in the file of PHP, we can write HTML inside there, because Laravel being a PHP framework, all its files and everything should read .php. That's why you're seeing something like this. But the views are acting as our front end. So that is it for now. Now leave alone this JS and the CSS. Don't first assume them as the other CSS and the JS that you know. For now, leave them there. I'll explain where we put those resources in a Laravel application. So I'm done with the views. Now I'll go to another folder. Now there is another folder which is called the public. Now, what do we do in the public? Now, all the resources, that is the CSS, the JavaScript, the images. Now, in Laravel, we call them the assets, or even in any other framework, they are like the assets. So, all those assets like the videos, the CSS, the JavaScript, the images, all of them should reside here. Yeah, for example, if maybe you have your folder and it has got resources like the images that you're to use, make sure all those images are inside the public folder. So Laravel, as it's running, it keeps on checking in public to see whether there is any resource it needs to load. So that's what we mean by this folder called the public. Now another folder that I'm going to go to, there is a folder up here, which is the first one, called the app. Now this app folder, when I open it, it has other subfolders inside them. For example, we have the this HTTP and then the models. I'll begin with the HTTP. I reopen them, and then you're going to see that inside the HTTP we have another folder called the controllers. So now it's now within this controller that we define our actual controllers. Now for you people, since already we have done some Java, now we have something to deal with classes. Yeah, as you can see, for example, this abstract class. But maybe to explain about controllers. Now controllers, these are used to handle the business logic of the application. For example, assuming, let's say you're creating an application to register someone, and you want to ensure that the phone number is mandatory or the email is mandatory. Now for you to put those checks are put under a file called the controllers. And if you're still recording, I mentioned in the other previous tutorial that Laravel was designed on an MVC architecture. Now I explained MVC in terms of models, the views, and the controllers. So Laravel uses this structure. It checks the models, it looks at the controllers, and then it looks at the views. Now the other thing that the controllers does, these controllers always communicates with the views for that page to be rendered. Let me give you an example. Now when you go to my website, let's say Apex Global Technologies, and then you click on the maybe contact us or service. Now the moment you click on that, now what you're clicking on is known as a route. Now that route will connect with your controller to know which particular page does this user want to access. So it's the controller that communicates with the views, like the controller, that the one we're going to see here. It's the one that communicates with the views inside here, so that that page gets rendered back. Yeah, so that's what we mean. Of course, I'll explain further as we keep on developing. For now, just understand that if I'm asking you where controllers are residing, they are inside the app, HTTP, and then the controllers. So that's where we put the controllers. Then if we leave the controllers, another thing we can talk about as another folder called the models. Now the models, let me just open the models folder. As you can all see, we have a model already, which is the user model. This comes by default, and the reason that's why you're seeing this user model, it's because we said Laravel has got a predefined authentication. Like we have already authentication within Laravel. So already those things of register user, login user, password reset, and everything has already been worked on. That's why you're seeing something like this. But when I go back to Laravel, when you talk about a model, what is a model, to Laravel? Now Laravel, remember, it interacts with the database. Yeah, Laravel has got the backend, and that's the database where we are saving the data. Now you need a model to interact with your database. Now treat a model as a security guard. Now the model acts as a mediator between the application and the database. So for whatever that has to be stored in the database has to pass through the model. So treat the model as the checker. It checks to ensure that this data that is coming from the application is authentic, and it has to go to the database. And also the reverse is true. In case maybe the user wants to retrieve data from the database back to the application, it's still the work of the model to give a way, like it creates a pipeline between your database and the application. Let me use this scenario. For example, if maybe we have our system like MobSafe, and maybe I click on programs or course units. Now for you at your end, you just see course units being listed on the screen or on the page. But what happens behind the scenes? Now the model has been instructed to return back all the course units to be displayed on a page. And the reverse is true, assuming, let's say, you're submitting your exam, assuming you have done a test and then you want to submit. Now before that data is saved as an exam which is completed, the models have always to check and see whether this data is validated and every field is going to receive the data it expects to receive. So what does that do? It's the role of the model to do that in our Laravel. That's why you can see that already by default. Of course, I know right now you might not understand this, but just know that these are some of the fields in our database that we protect. I'll explain more about this protected fieldable and all that stuff in the coming videos, but for now, just know that a model is something that interacts with our database. Now the controllers are the one that interacts with both the models to get the data from the database, but also it communicates with the views so that that data gets rendered to the page. Remember I told you that views, whenever you hear about views in Laravel, treat views as the HTML files or as the front end of the application, the views. So that is it for the models. And where did we find them? We go under the app, and then there's something called the models. Then about the controllers, you go under app, then HTTP, then controllers. So I can now close the app. I'm done with this for now. Now when you see other things that I have not explained inside that folder, just know that for now at the beginner level they are not so necessary, but we shall see them in the coming videos. I'll be making more videos to ensure that I explain each and everything for you, and basing on your user feedback, I'll keep on monitoring and improving wherever you want me to explain. I'll be able to explain each and everything, because at least with Laravel I know it in and out. At least I can explain each and everything, whatever you want to know about Laravel. Then the other thing is the config. For now, I think since we are at a beginner level, we can first leave that. Let me talk about the database. Now there is a folder called the database, which one is where we are handling everything to do with the migrations and the seeders. Let me first explain. For example, I explained where we declare variables that connect with our database. But with Laravel, we do not manually go to the, let's say, the XAMPP and then phpMyAdmin, then we create these tables manually. So with Laravel, we don't do that. With Laravel, we run what we call migrations. Now, there is a folder called migrations, if you can all see. And by default, since I told you Laravel being a framework, there are already some migrations that are auto-created as you're creating your first Laravel application. And maybe if I happen to open one of them, you're going to see that I've just opened the user's migration table. And now this user migration table has got already these schemas. Now treat schemas as tables, and these tables has got already the fields. For example, as you can all see now, there is a table called users, which has got a field called the name, the email verified at, the password, and all these tokens, and then the timestamps. Similarly, there are other still tables that are already declared in the same file. That's the password reset token, the session token, and all that stuff, as you can all see this. Now in Laravel, as I've just explained, since we are not doing everything manually, we are using a command line, we are using a terminal. And how do we access the terminal? Just click on these three dots, then come here, then click on the terminal. Now for anything that you want to interact with the application, we shall be using more of the terminal. The terminal gives you access to the application so that you're able to run the command. For example, if I happen to come here, I'll just simply come and write php at sun serve. Now this is the command that we use to run our first Laravel application. So if you want to see how this application looks like, instead of the other manual approach of you going to right click then run the file, simply in Laravel just come here and write php artisan. Now remember this artisan command line too, right? I explained earlier when I was beginning this artisan. So here we are using it, php artisan serve, then you enter. The moment you run php artisan serve and you enter, you give it some time, just about maybe 1 to 2 minutes, so that it loads the development server. Remember, we want to see how it looks like in the when it comes to the application that we created. So you simply just run php artisan serve. It depends on maybe the strength of your machine. Some machine it might delay, and other machines it might too fast. Then other machine it might be, since it's the first time it's loading Laravel, it might take some time. But other machine, since it is used, you can see it is running by default. But now you can see that I was trying to start a Laravel application, and yeah, you can see right now it has started. Out, it always gives you a URL. Now this URL, so you can either hover on it and then you follow the link so that it can open, or nowadays it opens within here. You can now simply just come and copy this Control C, don't overpress the Control C. Then come to one of your browsing engine. Me, I prefer Move Chrome. And then come here and then you run. So you run this to see your Laravel application. So if everything is as successful, you will see that this one will run and then it will be able to display your first page. So it's running. We shall check on it. It's running, and then actually I can see we keep monitoring it because here it has to load the logs. It will load the logs here. I can tell that it has started by logging the logs there. So it's running. It might be a little bit slow because it's the first time you're running your Laravel application, but eventually it will run. The same way you saw how it delayed to bring the terminal, being that I had already erased everything on the system, and I had to redo everything. You see it ran into a fatal error, and I think this error might be as a result that I have not yet run. I need to run PHP this command. Let me first run it. I think it might be the issue. Let me open and I run it. Yes, I think I had to first run the migration so that these tables are created in the database. Yeah, because already we have these tables as you're seeing them here, and we had to run a command that can help us create these tables in the database. For example, the command is very simple: php still artisan. You're going to see that almost everything that I do, I'll keep on putting php artisan. So I'll just say migrate. Yes, this I can just say php artisan migrate, then I run. Now when I run this, what I'm trying to do, database does not exist. You want to create it? Yes, create it. And then yeah, you can see if I happen to come here and I happen to check on, let's say that I'll go to this php my admin, and I'll be able to see that there is an app, rather database known as Apex Demo. And then when I open it, already you can see it has this users table. Now all these tables are auto-generated: email, what. As you can see, those ones are now the field that I was talking about here. So here we do not manually come here and we create a table, but rather we run migrations and then we are able to create those tables. So if I happen to refresh again here, you can see that now that issue will be solved. As you can see, we are successful in loading our first Laravel application. Now this is our Laravel application, and I think now you're able to see which file and which folder is important as you're explaining your first Laravel application. So we focus on these: the app, the database, the public, the resources. Maybe the other thing, before I forget, are the routes. Now here, with the routes, if you can all remember in your HTML, as you wanted to achieve navigation between the navs, you could always go to the let's say the anchor tag. It has the href, and then you define which, like for example, whenever I click on contact, that I should always go to contact.php or contact.html. So similarly in Laravel, how we handle that is called the routing. For example, the moment the user goes to my Apex Global Technologies website and clicks on, let's say, contact us, simply is pointing to a route which is /contact us, and that route, which is this one, this is where we declare routes. It's under routes folder, and then the file is called web.php. So it's here that we declare routes. As you can all see, that this route was referred to always bring the welcome dot, which welcome is this one that you have just seen here. So that's what you do. You ensure that everything runs as expected. This is our just brief introduction about the structure of a Laravel application. We have got other folders that we have not explained, and I have a reason as to why at this stage we are not explaining it, but I'll keep on just explaining it further in the next tutorials. For now, let me say bye bye and keep watching.